Okay, so this is going to be two videos actually. First one just describing the general concepts so that this part is understood. Alright, so when animating, if you're doing something very simple, you might just animate an actual object itself. But as you can see with this object, I know it's going to be more complicated, so I'm not going to animate it. Although it's moving around because it's parented to this object which has animation on it. Okay, and so usually, when you know it's going to be complicated, you start stacking parenting and different things to make life easier. So, but still, this is not good enough because this object here, I may want to rotate in different areas or position it in different places, but I don't want animation on this. I just want a clean animation on this X channel here. You can see it's animated on the X. So I want to keep that clean, simple animation on the X, but I want to put it in a different place. Normally what you do is then parent it again. So in this case, I'm parenting it again to this object here. And this object has a different position and rotation from the animated object, which does not have a new position or a separate rotation. It's only animated primarily on it does have these little values there, but that's nothing. That's just a slight mistake. So, but it's primarily being animated on this X channel there, like that. So it's still getting this X animation, as you can see, but because it's parented to this, it has a different position and orientation. Okay, so now, there it is. So, visual transform means how does it look when it's rotating, and as you can see here, the visual rotation looks very much similar to, if not exact, to the actual rotation, which is centered here, because this object also has a center right here, and this null is centered there, and this null is also centered there, right? So it appears to be the same, however they're not, because when you go here to this example, if you go back to 0, frame 0, you can see that this object, let's do this again, cursor to center, and object transform origin to 3D cursor. Okay, so now the object didn't move, but its origin is here now. So it has a new position. You see, now it has this position. It's a new position, whereas before it was at 0 because its center was at the same as the null. In this case now, however, the center is here, and therefore it has a position now up to here, where the null is. If that makes any sense. It's kind of backwards. But the null that's animated, it doesn't have a position. This one, however, does have a position, and it's placed and oriented over here. But as you can see, when I select this one, the transform is visual from the center of here, but the actual transform is over here. So it has moved the transform to over here from the center. So it's kind of a wild, it's going off all over the place, only to arrive at a rotation that appears to be here. That's what visual transform is. Alright, so it's just what it looks like it's doing regardless of what it is actually doing. So it's doing all kinds of wild rotations and positioning all over the place just to arrive at this here. Okay, and so it gets slightly more complicated because now these objects, even though they're still rotated at the center, they're parented to these objects, and these objects have all been positioned and rotated, and also a constraint, track 2, added to point those objects to this one, right? So now they're all rotating around their X. If you look at that null there, it has the rotation on the X. It's the same rotation only on the X, with keyframes only on the X. You see there, like that. But they are oriented differently and facing differently and forced to point towards this object, okay, because of this other null here, which has the constraint on it. So this one is parented to that to make that. So now slightly more complicated, and we come over here, and these objects now have their centers at 0, and the visual transform is the same, but the actual transform, as you can see, is going all over the place. Right? So that's what that is.